Good evening, everybody. Brian Neubert here from goldenblack.com, live in the Donald Tucker Center here in Tallahassee, Florida, following Purdue's semi-annual meeting with Florida State. This one resulting in a 79-69 win for Purdue over the previously struggling Seminoles. This is your wrap video. It's brought to you by our friends at the Purdue Club Hotel. Thank you to them, as always, for their support. It is profoundly appreciated. Purdue is 7-0. If you expected this game to be easy because Purdue was 6-0 and Florida State was 1-7, I think you were probably overlooking a couple of really hard realities about this game. One, Purdue was set up to fail here. It's embarrassing. It's unacceptable what the schedule-making powers that be made Purdue do here in terms of spending a week in Portland, coming back, spending basically a day in West Lafayette, and then heading to the opposite coast of where they just spent a week to play a basketball game. Purdue had some travel difficulties mixed in there. Damn near got into Florida State the day of the game. They got here at 2:30 in the morning, whatever it might have been. If you know anything about Florida State, you know that no matter how bad they may look, they're going to play hard. They're going to play with energy. They're going to be a pain in the ass from a defensive perspective. Pardon my French. And you had to expect something to come out of them more than what they've shown to this point at some point. What's the catalyst of that? Well, Purdue has a number 5 next to its name now. And the funny thing about that sort of reality is you tend to get a little bit more out of your opponents than your opponents have generally shown previously on film. So there was kind of this convergence of a bunch of stuff going on here that really made this a much more difficult game on Purdue, and was bound to make this a much more difficult game on Purdue than the fact that Florida State had been blown out by Stetson, had been blown out by pretty much the most random collection of teams you could possibly get blown out by. This is the most un-Leonard Hamilton-like season ever for Florida State. And I think what Purdue got here tonight was exactly what everybody should have expected Purdue to get. I'm not patting myself on the back here when I say this, but my predicted score for this game was 75-65. The outcome was 79-69. I figured this game would go exactly how it went. I figured Purdue would be in a slugfest for 30 minutes. Its depth ultimately would have to win out. It would have to make winning plays at the end. It would have to make Florida State, with its limitations of offensive skill, things like that, make some really, really low percentage types of plays to win this game. And ultimately, that's precisely what happened. That's precisely how Purdue won this game. And the one thing I will say about Purdue here is obviously this has been the best case scenario start to this season for Purdue. A big part of that is that what you've seen through 7 games is a Purdue team that knows how to win. And that is atypical for a team that is as young and as new as Purdue is. The last time I was here, I was sick as a dog. I was stressed out from having to cover Jeff Brahmapalooza. This was the night that the news came down that Brahm had decided to stay at Purdue. So I kind of sort of remember everything that happened that night, but not really. But I do remember how Purdue lost. And that was the stage of that season that obviously Purdue went on to win the Big Ten and almost go to the Final Four. That is the season I keep comparing this team to, because I think it's in a similar set of circumstances. This time of year, back then, that Purdue team did not know how to win games. Remember, they did not beat a high major opponent in non-conference play. This Purdue team has now beaten 5 in a row. And you just see this winning instinct from this Purdue team. And I think it's innate. I think it's internal. I think it comes from Braden Smith. In large part, I think it comes from the collective poise of those 2 freshman guards. But I think it also comes to a certain extent from some of these older guys. Some of these guys coming back, they learned a lot of hard lessons last year about how things are when you're really good, how to handle success. things like that. And some of that stuff might be showing up here. But also, I just, as I mentioned before, I think Braden Smith has this natural winning instinct about him. And I will say, I covered him in AAU, not as much high school, but a lot of AAU. And there were a lot of AAU games where his team was playing a team that, they probably should have been handling easier than they were handling them. And there came a point in the game where Smith went from Mr. Facilitate First guy to I'm going to take this thing by the throat guy. And his team won all those games. And every time I saw Braden Smith go up against a high-end talent, a higher-ranked player, a player as talented or more talented than him, Smith played really well. And I think that speaks to what he's made of. It speaks to his wiring. I think Fletcher Lawyer's got a lot of the same stuff in him. There is not an ounce of fear in either one of those guys. And I think they've really brought kind of a winning instinct to a team that's really done a good job establishing kind of I don't want to say a winning culture because that's a little bit too broad a term here, but a knack for the moment, a knack for either making that run against Marquette, withstanding that run against West Virginia, preventing that run against Gonzaga and then Duke, and then just winning a rock fight here at Florida State under really difficult circumstances. I think that's probably the most telling of the broad takes I think any of us can have about this game and really this season so far, is that teams are supposed to, quoting Steven Tyler again, as I very often do, because I actually believe this, I think teams have to lose to know how to win. I think you have to make mistakes. I think you have to lose games. You have to be back in those situations again, know you've been there before, and do it right the next time. And it seems thus far, and there's a long season ahead, and there's going to be ups and downs. There were ups and downs tonight. But I think that this team has so far looked like they've skipped that step. They've tested out of having to struggle, having to lose. And that's uncommon for teams in situations like Purdue's. I'll compare this again to those 07, 08 teams where Purdue lost some games they had won. And that team, Carson Edwards, Ryan Klein a few years ago that I keep calling back to here, they had to lose this time of year. And I don't want to call them a young team because they weren't as young as some of these other teams, but they were new together. They had to lose these games this time of year. They had to lose at Florida State. They had to lose to Virginia Tech and Charleston. They had to lose. They beat Maryland. Who did they lose to in the Crossroads? Doesn't matter. Forget it. Anyway, that team learned from losing, and it was a really reasonable expectation for this Purdue team that, hey, they're going to go to Portland. If they go 2-1, awesome. If they go 1-2, fine. They're going to go to Florida State. They're going to lose because of the schedule. As soon as the schedule came out, you had to look at this game as a loss. Now, the way Purdue has played and the way Florida State has played completely flipped that here the last couple weeks. But you had to come into this season expecting this game to be a loss. The last week or two, no. You expected this game to be a win. A hard win, but a win nonetheless. But my point is Purdue has not really had to learn via losing. And I could be speaking too soon. Big Ten play has a way of changing things entirely. But what you don't see in this team are red flags. After Portland, I talked a lot about last season, and all season long I've talked about how there are no good comparisons to this year's team and last year's team other than the circumstances because there are two thoroughly different teams. The situations now are the same to a certain extent, but the way Purdue was winning last year did not look nearly as sustainable as the way Purdue is winning this year. They were all set up tonight, to struggle. They did struggle, and they dug their way out of it. And once again, they made all the plays in the final 10 minutes of the game to get this done. I think that speaks volumes about Purdue. I think this was a forgettable performance by Purdue largely. I think Florida State had a ton of energy. I think Purdue struggled to match it. It's understandable given their their travel situation. I don't think Purdue looked past Florida State in any way, shape, or form. I just thought they didn't have their legs. When you look at the free throw shooting being what it was, when you look at just the general kind of sluggishness that perhaps I was imagining it, but it looked to me like there was a little bit of that. Completely understandable, perfectly normal. These are human beings, mind you, but I think that was real, and Purdue overcame it, and that's a really positive thing. And I think, from a individual's perspective, once again, I think you have to give a ton of credit, to Braden Smith for, once again, the 10-minute mark of a game, the 14-minute mark of a game, whatever it is, just grabbing the game by the throat and doing what he keeps doing. Caleb First, once again, being that catalyst, being that guy who just comes in and changes the game. Cannot say any more about what he's doing to really impact these games for Purdue, how important he's been for Purdue, without putting up huge numbers to show for it either. Just watch the games. Don't look at the stats. You'll see how valuable Caleb First is. But there were guys on Purdue's team who just didn't have it tonight, I didn't think. I didn't think Smith had it in the first half, and then, once again, that point in the second half, he has it. Zach-Ade, again, you're talking about a National Player of the Year resume being built here. Long season ahead, but, he doesn't basically touch the ball for the first 5-6 minutes of the game, still ends up with 25 points and whatever he had. I don't have a box score. The printed box score is apparently going the way of the Brontosaurus here, which is fine. I don't like wasting paper, but I also like to have stats in my hand when I actually do these videos. But as I wrote, to kind of quote Jurassic Park in my game story, dominance finds a way. And when you're as dominant as Zach-Ade is, and when Florida State's front court is as limited as it is, it was always going to end up this way. It was always going to end up with Zach-Ade having his 25 and what easily could have been 10 rebounds, but I think he only ended up with 8. Gave a great comment after the game, too, a great self-aware comment that I think people should appreciate about how he doesn't care about his rebounding totals. He just wants Purdue to get the rebounds. So he concentrates on, taking his guy out of the play. He makes sure that when somebody else has a beat on the ball, he doesn't get in their way. Just a really mature and self-aware thing to say. Guys get wrapped up in their stats a lot. There are guys in the NBA I know who there are unwritten rules on their team that if the ball just rolls off the rim at the end of a missed free throw, it's his ball. He gets the stat. Just like there are guys in the NBA who don't want to take that end of half shot because they don't want it to hurt their field goal percentage. Don't think for a second that stuff doesn't trickle down to the college game too. But Zach-Ade legitimately doesn't seem to care about his own statistics, when right now his own statistics matter because he is mounting, a candidacy here for things that would be, pretty special. But he is setting a really good tone for this team, I think, all across the board. I think last year Purdue had some older guys who did not set a great tone for Purdue in a lot of different ways, and I think Zach-Ade is really part of the solution to some of this stuff. I think Mason Gillis is part of the solution. I think Ethan Morton's part of the solution. I think one of the best things for Purdue this season so far is the older guys on this team, I think, seem to have learned some things about some of the undoings of last year's team. Obviously, again, I have said over and over again, we're not going to compare this year's team to last year's team. They are profoundly different teams. They are profoundly different groups of individuals. But I think the circumstances have been worth just kind of mentioning them here and there. So that's kind of what I got from Florida State, from Purdue's 79-69 win at Florida State. Only 4 points on each side off of my pregame prediction. Yay for me. So this is Brian Neubert from goldenblack.com, here from the Tucker Center at Florida State. My man, Donald Tucker. This was my third time here, making this my all-time most visited out-of-conference true road game venue. Can you believe that? Florida State, of all places. I will never see the inside of this place again, most likely, because the Big Ten ACC Challenge is no more, unless the new TV group wants to somehow breathe life back into it. I do not imagine that happening. But I keep calling it likely the last Big Ten ACC Challenge, just to cover things, just in case something like that happens. It's not going to happen. This was the last Big Ten ACC Challenge. This was probably the last time for a while Purdue and Florida State are going to play. What are we going to do without our annual Purdue-Florida State basketball game, guys? I don't know. But anyway, thanks, everybody. I appreciate you watching. Thank you for watching. Thank you for reading. Thank you for listening. And thank you for processing our materials. However it is you process our materials, I will talk to you again on Sunday after Purdue plays Minnesota in its Big Ten opener. A game Zach Edey has already looked right past, as he mentioned Hofstra in his post-game interview. He didn't mean anything by it, but it was just hilarious. So thanks, everybody.